Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. Dr. Scott Wright is a world-renowned cardiologist with the Mayo Clinic, but he's also K0MD, a serious DXer contester, past editor of the National Contest Journal, and most notably, a member of the CQ Hall of Fame. And there's so much more. But I really appreciate catching up with Scott tonight. I've been trying to track him down for a while. He's in Jacksonville, Florida, and he agreed to do this after his late night dinner. So this is 9 o'clock at night, and really appreciate him taking the time to spend a few minutes talking about ham radio. Hi, Scott. Thanks for joining me.
Hello, Kevin. What a pleasure to join you, and always happy to do a ham radio interview.
Well, let's start at the beginning because I always like to know how people got started in ham radio. I think you're from Kentucky, and I don't know if you got your start in Kentucky or if it wasn't until you were in Minnesota. But tell us about that background.
Sure, I did get my start in Kentucky. I was a seventh grade student, and a substitute teacher came in for the week for our seventh grade teacher, and basically strongly encouraged us to go to the library and find books to read, or he would have to assign a lot of homework. So, like all good students, we went to the library, and I discovered a book on amateur radio, and it grabbed my attention, and I took it home and couldn't help but read it through several times. And so I picked the book up on a Monday, and by Wednesday night, Wednesday or Thursday night, I had actually learned the entire alphabet of Morse code. And so this may be something I want to do. So I chatted with my dad and said, "Do you know anybody who does this?" And it turns out a neighbor about a mile away had a nice ham station, and he introduced me to another gentleman in town who had given the novice exam to this neighbor and to his partner in the pharmacy business. And then the gentleman who gave me the exam and the two neighbors who were hams were all attending the church we belonged to. So I met some neat adults and got mentored by three men and who were both all three active hams, and that's the story. And then joined a local radio club, which happened to be 40 miles away. So my dad would either take me or I would ride with one or both of the neighbors to the club meeting. And I think my dad always wanted to do amateur radio, but he didn't want to learn Morse code and go through the pain of it. And I enjoyed the code, and then just sort of captured my fascination. And I always made time for it. And it seems that I learned early in life to earn enough money to buy antennas and radios, and got into the cycle that hams get into. I put up a tower, put up a tri-band Yagi, and a rotator. Wasn't fancy. It was an inexpensive set that I could pay for by mowing yards, and then upgraded the station from the original radio, which was a Heathkit, to a Drake B line. And then another gentleman moved into the community when I was in high school, and his wife was my Spanish teacher in high school. And she learned that I was a ham, and she said my husband is. So went to his home and saw his station, and then he came over and he actually taught me how to do DXing, taught me how to work a split pileup, how to work stations, how to work up, and how to really use the Drake B line in a much better way. And so I've always been interested in talking to people overseas and doing long distance HF communication. I was never really enthralled with the community service events, with the 2 meter HT type things. But I either enjoy doing HF distance or talking on repeaters 100 miles away. And living in Kentucky, and at that time in the sunspot cycle, propagation was really good. So with 100 watts, I was able to work a lot of countries and meet a lot of interesting people. And then at the University of Kentucky in undergrad, I got access to the ham station, and they had a much better setup with a newer radio line and a nice antenna that was much higher than my home antenna at 40 feet. And just was able to enjoy the hobby even at that point in my life.
Well, it sounds like you were fortunate enough to have those mentors around you to help you out. Were there any other kids your age that you were able to do ham radio with?
Not close by. I met some on the air, and there was a gentleman named Jeff Simpson in Northeast Tennessee that I would talk to, and we met at an FCC examining station. In those days, you would have to travel 3 or 4 hours each way to meet an examiner and take the general or advanced license, and I did that. Got my advanced license, I think, before I finished eighth grade, and stopped there, and then did not even attempt to do the extra class until I was in medical school. And then eventually passed it. I took it once in medical school and missed it by a question. And then I got busy in residency. And then in my fellowship time doing cardiology training, I had a research year. and I was able to have some free time and started studying for the extra class exam because it turned out that the characteristics of impedance and RF transmissions, understanding reactance and inductance and things, was very similar to cardiovascular physiology. So studying for the extra class actually helped me understand cardiac physiology in much more depth and really improved it. So no, answer the question. I met some younger hams my age on the air, but there was no one close by around. Those guys were 15, 20 years older than me at the time. They seemed much older, but they weren't. They were young adults, and you know how it is. Anybody 2 years older than you when you're in middle school or high school seems old. And I looked up to them and tried to model my station after theirs. One of them, WA40JT, Jim Burgess, visited me a few years ago and came to see my current station, which is a fairly large antenna array, and sent a photo to his wife. And she said to him, "What did you get this guy into so many years ago?" And I think he was quite impressed with the station I built.
I've got to say, I would have assumed that you probably set ham radio aside while you're going through your medical training, because I know that's an intense process. So I'm really intrigued to know that you not only stuck with it, but you got your extra class license. And I'm very intrigued to understand this connection between medicine and ham radio. As you know, my wife is a physician, and through her, I know many physicians actually that are ham radio operators, and it just seems unusual to me. I never am surprised when I hear of an RF engineer or even a younger engineer that isn't a ham radio. But I am a little bit surprised that so many people that I know, and obviously I'm a ham radio operator, so there's that shared interest, but so many doctors are into the hobby. What do you think that is?
I think it really reflects the hams of our era generation often got licensed in their teenage years. And when you have bright, inquisitive young minds who like science and technology and math, ham radio was one of the great venues to be able to hone those skills and explore new creative things. I grew up in eastern Kentucky in the Appalachian Mountains, and there really were not a lot of activities and things to do. And ham radio was a great thing for me to help me grow and mature and to teach me a lot about world geography and really rounded me into being a much more, I think, global adult and knowledgeable person. So I think it was just those early interest in understanding science, technology, being reasonably intelligent and having a challenge to do. I think physicians today who still do it, many of them don't get licensed until they're adults, but they wanted to when they were younger. And it just is that same interest in doing it. And I think there's something special. People who are not hams don't understand how special it is to call CQ and have someone from another country or someone from 8,000 miles away answer you, whether it's on sideband or on CW, and even now digitally with FT8 or RIDI. There's just something special about that. And it's really neat. We can all make those calls through a cellular telephone network or a telephone or now via the web. But when you're going through the ionosphere, it's still a lot of uncertainty. And it's just really cool to see how all that comes together.
I find myself struggling to explain this to people. I just got back into ham radio, as you know, a couple years ago, and I've had a lot of people ask me, "So why do you do this? We have the internet now, we have cell phones," and trying to explain what you've just said, that intrigue and the fascination is hard. I mean, the only way that I can really explain it to people is to actually put them in front of a radio and have them start turning the dial. And some get it, some don't, but that's been my best way, hands-on.
I often say to people, why do people go fishing when they can buy any one of 24 fish types in the local supermarket, right? And well, we enjoy it. It's fun. It's great. And I'll say it's the same with ham radio. We can make a telephone call through any kind of telephone network, and all of it is voice over internet now, getting there. But there's something special about doing it the old-fashioned way and hearing the static, hearing the crashes, and just recognizing that you're able to use science and physics and just make this happen. It's just magic. And I think the early license experiences when we were all novices that taught us to have to get on the air and operate for a couple of years to be able to upgrade was very formative and helpful. While I certainly embrace and endorse the current licensing structure of making it easier, starting a class of technician, I think they also miss out on a little bit, which I did not miss out on, and I think that's why I love CW and love operating still.
So I heard you on the radio this past weekend, the CQ Worldwide DX contest. Unfortunately, I couldn't reach out to you because it was a DX contest. But I know contesting is a really important part of the ham radio hobby for you. Tell me, when did that begin and why, and how have you seen that shift over the years?
Yeah, thank you. I heard you on as well, and congratulations on a terrific score. You did extremely well. I really took up contesting seriously in 2000, late 2006, early 2007. I It was sort of recommended by a friend, Fred K4 Italy Uniform, a local friend in Ham, because I had made a run for political office in 2006 while as a physician at Mayo Clinic, and lost the race. And he said, "I think you might find some a consolation prize and some consoling in getting back more active in the hobby." And so I started contesting. And then I realized that I've been a contester my entire life. And I knew that because I would always go to field day, and I was the person who said, "Can I operate all night? Can I?" And I love the runs. I love sideband. I love the runs on sideband. I love talking to people, working as many stations as possible. And I enjoy chatting with people too, but I really enjoy just churning contacts and churning QSOs. And soon after starting contesting, a friend Glenn Johnson, W0GJ, invited me to go to the Caribbean and operate with him, and I did. And there was a sideband, ARRL DX sideband contest, and two things really caught my interest and made me serious about contesting. One was the rate. It's just cool to work 200 to 300 stations an hour. Many hams don't even work 200 stations a year on HF, but here we were working 200 an hour. And then it was just the experience. I think if you have an interest in language and an interest in the American culture, when you work a 48-hour contest where you're the DX and you're working in the United States, you hear every accent, you hear every unique feature and idiosyncrasy of just different regions of the U.S. And I found that fascinating because the W1s and W2s are much different than the W4s. The W5s are different. The W6s are different. The zeros are different. The sevens and eights and nines. There's similarities, but there's some unique differences, and the accents are just amazing. I just enjoyed hearing the different ways that we sound speaking English as Americans. So I just enjoy it. I've always dreamed of having a radio station where I could say CQDX and then have to decide, do I want to work the station from Asia, Europe, or South America? And I'm at that point now. And I just love that about contesting. I think, secondly, if you're busy, as most professionals are, not just physicians, but a lot of professionals, especially when you have children in the house, you can't be on the air all the time. So, you can get a good radio fix for a weekend and work a lot of people. And then that will, you will savor those memories, and you'll enjoy thinking about what you did for a few months. So I love contesting for all those reasons. And I'm naturally a competitive person. And if you're a competitive person and you get into contesting, you have to sort of self-regulate a little bit because there's always going to be someone better, someone who scores higher and someone who scores lower. And, you just have to realize you're competing against yourself and your old records, not really against the station in Maine like yours.
I appreciate that comment. I've got a mentor myself down in Georgia who has given me a lot of great advice, and he's always, and I appreciate this about him, he's always talking about how I might be able to win. And I keep reminding him when I go for a run, if I do a half marathon, I never plan on winning. I want to compete against my own time. And I approach contesting the same way. I want to do well based upon where I've been, but I don't have any expectation that I'm going to hit number one worldwide anytime soon. But I really enjoy people that have. I know that you did the CQ Worldwide contest, but I've also seen that you have worked in field day, participated in field day. So I know that's not a contest, wink, but my point is it seems like you participate in a wide range of competitive activities on ham radio. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a very fair statement. I even I enjoy field day. I enjoy doing it with friends. This past field day, K4IU and I worked with a friend, Pat W0BM, who's a longtime ham, but fairly new to CW. He had trained through the CW ops program and become quite proficient. And so we said, Pat, we're going to do a three-person field day with you, and you're gonna be doing CW only, and let's put your skills to test. And I think he was a little concerned that maybe he wasn't ready for it, but after watching him run he was at one point using a code reader, which was fine with me if he did that. But now he can actually copy the code in his head and type it into the logging program, and he has that satisfaction. I think one of the other reasons I do contesting is that I get pretty quick feedback on how I'm performing, how the station's performing. And I think all of us who are professionals like to improve. We'd like to improve what we do. We like to hone our skills. We like to get feedback that's meaningful, and contesting gives me that feedback. And as a physician, I think it's important to have hobbies or activities that stimulate your brain outside of your primary occupation that give you either some pleasure or meaning in life. And if you're competitive, though, you can become frustrated or too focused on it. And, like boat owners, they say boat owners, the happiest 2 days of their lives are buying and selling the boat. And sometimes I think, my family asks me, you seem frustrated with things. Well, I'm not frustrated, really. I'm frustrated with me. Why can't I stay up longer? Why can't I endure this? Why can't I run better? Why do I have 3% error or 2% error rates in the log entries? I compare myself to K1AR or K5ZD, who I think you've interviewed on the program. And they're really experts at doing it. They've been contesting since they were teens. And, it's something, contesting is not something you can pick up overnight. You can do it overnight, but you really get better the longer you do it. And I enjoy activities like the CWT events. They probably have become my single favorite 1 hour episode of running stations. I have a goal of working 200 contacts an hour. I've hit 170. Work recently has kept me from being on, which is frustrating, but work is work and you have to do that first. But I'd love to get on CWTs more and just work. How many stations an hour can I do it? And with some of the travel I do with my job, I've picked up a QRP radio and an infed half wave, and sometimes I bring it, especially when I'm in Florida, like I am tonight in Jacksonville. I'll throw an infed half wave off the balcony and see what I can work. And that's humbling. 5 watts, it's humbling because it's harder to work stations than when you have Yagi stacks and running 1500 watts. So it's made me appreciate what the QRP community does and the Parks on the Air guys and gals do, because it's easy for me with my station now to work those things. So I sometimes trying to learn a new skill of QRP, and that provides even another challenge.
I picked up a used Elecraft KX3 with the idea that it'd be easier to travel with, that I could throw up a wire. And the first time I used it, I went out to California to visit our son who lived near Los Angeles. And I had this vision that I was going to set up on a beach and make 100 contacts in an hour. I think it took me an hour and a half to make 10 contacts, and it was an incredibly humbling experience. And I couldn't wait to get back home to my I use a TS480 locally with 200 watts, and there's a significant difference. Not to mention the fact that, if you're in Maine activating a park for POTA, there are a lot more people calling you than when I was in California on the beach. So I totally understand that. And I want to get into more of your travels with ham radio, because I know you've had extensive travels to Turks and Caicos and China, Chile. But let's stick with your station for a minute. I think you're an Elecraft person, but tell us more about what you have at home and how that's developed over time from Heathkit to Drake and now Elecraft.
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, I started out with a Heathkit, a radio that my dad picked out and bought for me in 1977. If he had asked me what I wanted for the same money, I would have picked up a Kenwood 520. But the gentleman who gave me the novice exam suggested the Heathkit HW101, and so he bought that. And I ended up buying a CW filter and then paying to have it repaired by the Heathkit company so that it would do sideband when I became a general class operator. And then after that, I had a Drake B line. And when I moved to Minnesota in 1989, I met a gentleman, W0AGL, who's now Silent Key. And I didn't have a station with me. And he had invited me to his home to operate. And he had all Collins and ICOM equipment. And he had been a physician for many years and retired. And had been a physician to Art Collins, who started the Collins Radio Company. And he said, Art told me that ICOM is the heir to the Collins excellence. So I started using ICOM equipment and went through a number of ICOM radios and had really almost everything they ever manufactured from the late 90s. In the mid 90s, I bought a 775 DSP, and then eventually bought a 756 Pro 2, and then a Pro 3, and then I had a 7600, a 7610, a 7800, and a 7851. So I really enjoyed them. I had some difficulty making my bandpass filters and other things read the CIV data consistently instead of locking up periodically. And there was such enthusiasm around Elecraft that when the K4D came out at Dayton, I put an order in for one. And after I got the K4D and started using it, it is the absolute best CW radio I've ever owned. And I was in a ARRL DXCW contest, and I was going to use the 7851 for the first 24 hours, and the K4D for the second. And something happened with the logging program or something that caused me to go early to not even do 24 hours of the 7851. Something failed. And so I had the other K4D on a second computer. And so I just saved the ADIF file, inserted it into the other computer, and then started with the K4D. And I made 3 contacts on the K4D. I went back to the 7851 for a single QSO, and then I stopped, which is unusual for me. And then I compiled an email to Wayne and Eric at Elecraft and said 3 QSOs. How many QSOs did it take for me to realize that I prefer the K4D? And that was, I promised myself that I wasn't going to sell the ICOM stuff because I wanted to really test the K4D and make sure it met my needs. But boy, by that time in February of that year, it was clear. And then in April, I sold all of the ICOM stuff and bought a second K4D, which took a while to come. Turned out a friend loaned me his K4D, so I would have 2 in the shack until my second one came, because he had bought it, but he was too busy doing some home remodeling to put it in place. So he just said, "Here, you take it and use it and get it back to me when you're done." And I did, and I've been really happy. Those radios, they perform. Their pan adapters and band scopes are beautiful. I find them soothing and relaxing. I'm not here to sell anyone a K4D. You have to decide what you want to use. But for me and for what I do, it has been the best investment and best radio I've ever used. And even with the sideband contest, I sent a note to Elecraft after the event and said, "Boy, these digital filters are brick wall." I mean, ICOM makes great stuff, but the digital filtering in the K4D I found to be superb. So yes, I am an Elecraft person. I'm very pleased with their products, and I like to say now almost everything in my station was designed, conceived, and manufactured in Northern California. I have a lot of Force 12 antennas that Tom Schiller built. I have a KPA 1500, a K4D pair. I have a couple of ACOM amps also, but I have really become quite the enthusiast. And I think, I've watched the hobby evolve over the last several decades, and we're in a very good position now where we have some great rigs out of Japan, but we also have 2 great American companies making radios, Elecraft and Flex. And that's kind of neat to see that American ingenuity has resurfaced and is now probably the leading edge among all the transceivers that are sold. My friends who have the Yaesu FT101 love it. I think it's a great radio. But for what I do, and for CW contesting and CW events, and for the size of my station, the K4D is just fantastic. And it's only 10 pounds. So it's lighter than a 7300, but it outperforms a 7851.
So you've described quite a station. What's the next purchase you're looking to make?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm always looking to improve what I do. And I will say that investing in antennas is far more effective than investing in radios or amplifiers. So I'm pretty well set on radios and amplifiers. But I think the next setup will be to replace my 2-element 40-meter Yagis with some 4-element 40-meter Yagis. And then I'll likely upgrade the C49 Force 12 Yagis eventually to the new JK Megatri. I've talked with Ken at JK a number of times, and I've methodically thought about it, and I've reached the point where I think 40 meters will be the next upgrade, and then I'll go to the JK Megatris. His modeling and his construction techniques are the best I've ever seen. So that's likely. Those are the plans for next year. Every December, I make an analysis of the station. I do a SWOT analysis, a strength, weakness, opportunities, and potentially threats, right? And for a number of years, the threats I didn't have solid first-class engineering with the grounding, with other things. So I methodically did the boring stuff. I put in a single station point ground. I put larger copper wire and running to the house ground, and then big straps to all the radios. And I bought the DX Engineering copper plates and mounted the radios and grounded them to that. And I'm very happy with where we are engineering wise. I'm not having any failures these days. And so now I think it's time to spend some more money on antennas. And then, once I get those upgraded, I will no longer have any of that to blame for poor contest performance. I'll have to look in the mirror to find the responsible party for not performing as well as I think I should.
So you've already told us that you have 2 K4Ds, which tells me that you are operating SO2R, correct?
That's correct.
And from everything I've heard, all the people I've talked to, that's an incredibly difficult process to get comfortable with. Tell me about that. Have you been doing SO2R for a while, and how have you made that work for you?
Slowly, I self-taught. The NCCC, the California Contest Club, put out a DVD series on SO2R, and I forget the gentleman whose call sign who produced it, but it was really well done. And it was done at N6RO Ken Keeler Station, and the motto was, if you can drive a car, you can do SO2R, because when we drive a car, we often are, of course, paying attention to the road, paying attention to drivers around us. We maintain situational awareness, but we may answer a call with the cell phone that's going through the car, or we're listening to a podcast or to the radio. And sometimes you adjust the volume, sometimes you adjust the temperature or cooling controls, and so, you're doing one main task, but you're also sort of, where your hand knows where to go to adjust the volume of the radio, or you do it on the steering wheel, or you raise or lower the speed, depending on where you are, you brake and things. So I think most hams can do SO2R. You have to figure out what you can do best. Despite my love and affection for CW, I was doing SO2R first with RIDI and then with phone before doing it with CW. And so there are some tricks. For example, you want to have the voice memories in your radio keyed with the key information for the contact for a contest, because with SO2R, you don't really have time to do it all by just talking into the microphone. And so I've been learning to do it. I've been getting better at doing it. The CWT events weekly give me the best practice. And what I'm teaching myself to do now is something called 2B SIQ, where every moment a radio is transmitting. So you're receiving on radio 1 and transmitting on radio 2. And when that transmission stops on 2, you start transmitting on 1 and you receive on 2. And so you learn to listen for the key information, and you learn to block out the tones in one ear that's your transmitting radio. Some people use what's called a latch technique, which means that the transmitting radio, you don't hear at all. I like to hear what I'm transmitting to make sure there's some mistake going out. But you learn to block it out, and you learn to copy things. And that's still kind of hairy for me. The best contesters in the world do that naturally. I'm not that way. I am still learning to do it, but I think it's good for me. I think it's stretching my brain. I'm hoping it's giving it plasticity to prevent some Alzheimer's or something down the road. And that's really one of the techs. Once you learn to do it, you're bored doing single radio. So you're ready to do SO2R when you're checking email or watching the sports scores, or watching a sports game on TV while you're contesting with one radio. I was getting into trouble contesting because I check email, and then somebody would call me. I would have to, and I couldn't get the Internet Explorer, whatever the program I was using from the web browser, shifted back to N1MM quick enough. So then I started doing the internet on a laptop over here, the radio here, and then I said, no, I need to do SO2R. I want to be a better contester, higher scores. And that's what I learned at Contest University. So I think, if I were to say what helped me be a better contester, first of all, was going to Contest University every year for a few years too, talking with people who are really good at it and can teach you, like Randy Thomas and N6MJ and John Doerr and K1AR and KL9A Chris. And you kind of understand, you hear what they do. The N6MJ and KL9A at 1WRTC. And I asked them, how do you do that? And Chris said, we start diligently practicing with a Morse runner in the summer, running pileups and 2 radios. And I'm like, of course you do. I mean, if you're going to compete in a sporting event, don't you practice? I mean, the golfers who play professionally go out and hit 1,000 balls every morning, before they start the tournament. And ham radio is no different than that. You just have to practice it and do it, and I still have to keep my skills as a physician going. It's not that I just can do it blindly. No, you stay educated, as you know, with your wife. You stay educated, you stay up to date, you learn new things, and you constantly hone your tactics and techniques. And it's the same with the ham radio. And so I think, Kevin, you can do SO2R at some point when you're ready.
Well, I am a rookie contester, but I can already relate to those moments where you're kind of bored and you get distracted. Either waiting to break a pile up or waiting for somebody to finally give their call sign to decide, if this is somebody I want to go after. And at those moments, I wish that I had another radio. But the idea of listening to 2 different radios, this seems a little intimidating to me. I am reminded of the conversation I had with Randy Thompson, K0MD, who was talking about practicing also, the same thing. Like anybody who's into any sport needs to practice. And it seems like such a basic piece of advice that most of us probably don't do enough. But I was also reading, I don't know if you saw this online, but Manu LU9 ESD was operating in Jamaica, and he put this really fantastic post up on Facebook, but was talking about the days when he'd be driving in his car for 2, 3, 4 hours, listening to basically the game tape. He would record a contest and listen to his participation in that contest so he could understand the call signs and the intonation and be quicker the next time around. I thought that was taking practice to an entirely different level. I was fascinated by that.
He sounds like an NFL quarterback watching tape, and that's great. That's something I can learn to do. I have not ever done that. I have paid attention to my knotted log reports that I get, and I find that I've changed phonetics on sideband depending on where I'm working, so that people do not mistake my call. My call is K0MD, MD like the doctor degree, but many people in Europe will have MA or something else. If you say Mike Delta, they think you're saying Mike Alpha. So now I use Denmark or Diego or something. Or and then the Japanese have I listen to how they pronounce my call back to me, and then I just mimic those phonetics to them when I call them and run them in pileup. So it's easier for them. I try to make it easy for a station to know my call, and I try to pay very close attention to what they're saying. And sometimes they'll send you hotel, and they mean it for O, but it should be with an H, and then you'll see, oh, why did I miss that? And then finally you notice it, that they need to learn a new phonetic like Oscar or ocean or something, rather than hotel, which is really for hotel with the H is silent. But yeah, so yeah, I think it's all about practice, and if you enjoy it, it's work, but it's fun. And you may be a beginning contester, but you had a great score in CQ Worldwide sideband, and where you are in Maine, you have the potential to just do well and just enjoy it as much as you can, as much as you want to.
I'm happy with the effort. As you probably read, I was in a hotel room in Arizona operating the station remotely in Maine, and everything was working fine. I had the internet solid, the station was working great, but hadn't considered that my wife was in the next room and there were guests around that didn't really want me screaming CQ for 48 hours. So adapting to that was not easy. So given the circumstances, I was pleased. I also had a rotor that stopped working halfway through the contest, which I was ready to just give up. That was my rookie brain saying, okay, just shut it down. And I figured out a workaround and ended up having a fairly good second half of the contest. So I think just sticking in the game and continuing made it okay. But getting back to you, Scott, you're not only a contester, you were the editor of the National Contest Journal. I believe you're on a contest advisory committee. Tell me about those steps. Like, it's one thing to be a contester and practicing and building your station, but for you to be willing to get involved at that other level, to advise on contests and to edit a magazine, how did that happen?
The National Contest Journal started in Minnesota by Todd Olson, K0TO. Todd and I started having lunches. He was coming to Mayo Clinic for healthcare in the last part of his life, and we would meet for lunch. And he and I, or he, K4IU, and I would sit down and have lunch. Fred and I often would take visiting hams that we knew to lunch because we wanted them to feel welcome in the community. We wanted them to have a relaxing hour away from the stress of hearing about your health issues and dealing with all the uncertainties of an illness. And Todd told me about the early days of NCJ and how it started, how he did it, how he and his family published it at home, and then eventually how he asked the ARRL and Dave Sumner to take it over. And in this current issue of NCJ, there's an interview between K3TN and Dave Sumner, K1ZC, that sort of retells that story. And so I knew about the journal. We were quite proud of it with its heritage and DNA coming out of Minnesota. And Pat Markey, N9RV, was editor before me, and I would write him occasionally and just say, "Hey, I liked what you're doing. These articles are really helpful for me. I'm building my contest station. Really appreciate the content." And so he wrote me during the last year or so of his editorship and said, "Would you consider being editor?" And I said, "Are you serious, really?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I was in between spots with work where I had a lot more free time than I normally do. And I said, "I can't really say no. It would be a great honor. And then you go through a vetting process with the ARRL, and I passed that. And then I recruited an associate or deputy editor to help me because, sometimes when I get busy, I need someone who can also just do some work to make sure we stayed on target. And worked with Steve Ford and Rick Lindquist, W1DED, who's in Maine, as the sort of the managing editor or the copyright editor, and then the past editors just really all came in and helped me when I had questions or wanted advice. They were quite good about that. And of course, I was editor during the Great Pandemic, which I found myself extremely busy for a while in the Great Pandemic, as did many physicians. And I was grateful. N0AX Ward Silver wrote in April or May and said, "Can I help you with anything?" And I said, "Ward, yes, if you would take over the next issue of NCJ until I can get the research project I'm working and helping lead under control, I would be grateful." Because to make the editorship work. What I had to do, Kevin, was give up some of my contesting, and that was okay. I contested less. I took, some of the hours that I would spend doing some of the weekend contests, and it was dedicated to the journal. But I said, what are the priorities? What does contesting need? What do I want to read about? I think others were interested. So I continued Pat Barkey's themes on station building. And I said, we've got a plan for the future. So I asked for a columnist to do next generation contesters, and Neil Rapp stepped up and did that. And then we also had remote contesting for a while with Mark Aker, K6UFO, to do that. And now, of course, the current editor, Lee Finkel, continued that with a different person or two. But I recognized there were trends in contesting, right? And we wanted to cover those, and we wanted to be on top of those. And so we did. We talked about state QSO parties, especially mobile operators. We talked about POTA and things like that, because I see POTA as really a natural contesting-like event that's a continuous program, similar to maybe DXCC and contesting as a merge. And just tried to tackle an article that would appeal to a big gun station like K9CT or K3LR. If there's anything they ever needed to know, they usually know most things. But bigger stations, then for the medium and contest station, the average contest station, and the newbie, what would we want to know? How would we have something for them? And then covered some interesting stories. I wanted to have an international editor to bring international contesters in. So CE3CT, one of my good friends, stepped up and said he would do that. So we made him the international international contest editor, and he did some great feature stories, so we could introduce contesters around the world. There were a couple of things with NCJ that I didn't accomplish that I wish I had. I wanted to make it the dominant periodical for global contesting, and I couldn't find anyone in Europe who would step up and help do that. But I thought this is a great publication. We could figure out a way to have a global subscription to it. Maybe we had to publish it outside of the English language a little bit, but it would be good for the league. But we just couldn't get that going, and I just probably didn't have the right connections and leadership to make that happen, even though it was a vision that I had. And then my goal was to try to increase subscribers, but thankfully we held most of the subscriber base, because a lot of contesters are now either leaving contesting or going QRT, and many of them are silent key. So we were losing subscribers, but now that's been stabilized a bit. So those were kind of the goals with NCJ, and it was a great privilege to do it and to join the giants who had been editors, and to work with them, and then to pass it along to Lee Finkel, who was the first editor ever from the Arizona Outlaw Contest Club, and a world-class contester in his own right, was really cool. And now, of course, it's going to the Potomac Valley Radio Club contest editor, K3TN, John Pescatori. So I think, the NCJ is in great hands, and it's going to continue to be the leading contesting periodical. I think it's, honestly, I wish it would come out monthly. I like it so much. I know how much work it is, but I think the contest community would love to see it more often. It's just not practical right now with the ARRL for it to be more than bi-monthly. And then there was another question you asked me about, and I forget what that was, but maybe you can.
I believe you were involved with a contest advisory committee of some sort.
Yes,
maybe it's the ARRL.
Yes. I was. Yes, I volunteered for that because I thought, I suggested that we make the NCJ editor an ad hoc member, right? Whoever's the editor, it would be good for them to know where the contest community is going, where the ARRL aspect is going. But that was never adopted. But I was appointed as a Dakota division representative, and so I served several years on that, and learned a lot about where people are. And I eventually stepped down a year early from that because I was quite busy with work. And I suggested to my division director that we needed a little more diversity on the committee. And could he find either a VHF contester, a woman, or someone of color, really, who would reflect the diversity of the contest community, because we were all white men. And I was the youngest one in my 50s, and most of them were in their 60s and 70s. And I thought we needed a little diversity with regard to ethnicity and contest experience and VHF versus HF and other things. And then it was just a convenient time for me to step away from it. And he appointed a successor who is doing a fabulous job. He's a VHF contester. And so I think that the committee needed that expertise. And I was happy to give up my spot so they could get someone who would bring a little more strength than I had to it. So I enjoyed the 2 years on it, but I was also happy to step away and finish out the term as NCJ editor and start spending a few more hours contesting myself because I was really missing contesting.
Scott, I'm intrigued that you look forward to getting the contest journal and wish that it was coming out more often. Do you think you're alone in that thinking, or do you think there are others that would like more content more often?
Oh, I think most contesters would like more content more often. Contesters are voracious readers and learners, and I really enjoy your podcast. I want to thank you for putting it out. I love the interviews you do. You have an interest in contesting, and so I really enjoy the people you interview. And I learned something from listening to them. And I've watched your interview with K.Thomas several times, your interviews with Tim Duffy a few times. And I think it's so helpful to have that. I think the QSO Today podcast is another example of great contesters who've been interviewed. And I learn something each time I listen to another episode. So, yeah, I think there's a real demand for more content, more information. I think the limiting step is that there's a fixed number of staff in Newington who can do some of this, and the contest community probably needs to own that responsibility and just be putting things out. Because I think that we've got a huge untapped market with POTA and SOTA. Thomas Witherspoon at qrpeer.com has a big following on his website and his YouTube channel. But I think even the SOTA and POTA folks would yearn for more content that sort of is a contest-like content that focuses on what they do and helps them understand how to maximize things. I think a monthly article between receiver gurus like Rob Sherwood and others would be great to talk about, how do we tweak receivers to enjoy maximum benefit? So I have a 10-year-old transceiver. Do I need to sell it? And the answer is no, you don't. There are things you can do to make it more sensitive and make it more selective, and I think there are tips like that all the time that things can be passed along. Another example, Kevin, is, this past weekend we had the biggest contest of the year, CQ Worldwide Sideband, but where I live, the conditions were horrible, right? I mean, it was just, Europe was really watery and weak, and I went out and looked at my antennas, and they were still in the appropriate spots and horizontal and parallel, so I knew I didn't have an antenna challenge. So I just knew it was propagation, but there have been times in my ham radio experience as a contester that I didn't know that conditions could sound so lousy, and that we could have radio blackouts. Even once in the Caribbean, we had several minutes of a radio blackout from a big solar flare. And I just think knowing that, understanding that, and I learned that from Frank Donovan, W3LPL, who taught about it at Contest University. He said, if you're going to do contest, you have to be on both nights because 80 and 160 will be different one night to the next. And so I've learned, as Frank taught, to be on both nights. And sure enough, I have seen that in my own QTH. And so I've learned how to sort of understand what reality is. Is it me that's messing up? Is it band conditions that are bad? Is it my radio system? Is it my antennas? You kind of learn what's limiting you. And so that you don't go through due diligence of analysis that would be just a waste of your time if it's the conditions. You can't change the conditions where you live. So I think that wisdom, that perspective, experience really helps. And I think that's where publishing and periodicals could really help level the playing field, among contesters, and especially help newer contesters understand and gain experience much more quickly if they had more to read and could, have that kind of content to savor and think about.
So I'm going to stick with this for a second, so just bear with me. You've mentioned YouTube videos, which I obviously think are a great addition to the hobby. You seem to be a great advocate for the printed material with publications. You haven't mentioned websites and internet much at all. But my base question is, do you think that within our hobby, print publications are not dead and that they could have a brighter future than, for example, what the ARRL is currently saying about the QST publication?
Yeah, I think what's driving the recommendations or the decisions from the ARRL is not that they doubt the quality and appeal of print publications. It's that how do you balance really a low membership fee $40 or $50 a year with the cost of producing a high quality. They produce high quality publications. They do not produce junk or poor quality stuff. It's either really good or not. They don't publish it. And so I think they struggle with that. I used to send notes to the CEO, Dave Sumner, and say, Dave, I pay 500 or 600 or $700 a year for professional societies, and I get more customer service and more benefit and more knowledge from what the league publishes for my $35 a year. So I became a Maximum Society donor and a Diamond Club member just to sort of help them financially. And so I think the league is not really downplaying publications as much as that's where the finances are. And they don't want to lose the population of members who just can't afford more than $40 or $50 a year. So I think that's what they're balancing. I do think, though, that if you look at what the league produces in terms of books and materials, those sell very well. And so I think, yes, I think, the beginning contesters can benefit from Doug Grant's book that he's written. But there are other materials. I think there's a whole need for intermediate range contest book or manual. So someone like you, who's not a beginner, even though you feel you're a beginner, you're not an intermediate contester, could understand, how to set up an SO2R station, how to improve your antenna performance, how to improve interactions with your radios, when to listen for Europe versus Asia, when to point the antenna for long path versus short path to pick up a rare mult. If you don't hear them short path, think changing it to long path. Those are all techniques. It was, Bob Locker wrote The Complete DXer, I think. And I learned a lot about DXing reading his book of things that I should have known, but I just didn't realize or put together and have applied them. So I think contesting could use a lot of that. I think there is a big demand for print. I think some people will prefer a digital version of printing. I still prefer to read a book in hand than on Kindle, but I really enjoy reading the journals on a big monitor, 32-inch monitor, because I can see it better, right, than I can the fine print that it comes out in. But I like having the printed material when I travel. I've got the CDXE, the Chiltern DX Club journal with me this trip, so I can read it in my spare time or on the plane. I think, So I think, Kevin, there is a lot of opportunity there, and it hasn't been maximized. I think that the league and others would look favorably upon some really good offerings if the contest community came out. For example, AJ8B had written me 3 or 4 years ago and said, "What do you think about a book on DXing?" And I said, "I think it's a great idea. You should do it." And he wrote Becky at the league, and she was like, "Well, send me an outline." She did, and I don't think he heard back from her, but by about the time he was maybe writing her again, someone from Northern California published a book on DXing, and it's superb. And so I think, there's a market for lots of that. And I think we're learning that you don't have to necessarily go through the league or CQ or RSGB to publish books. You can publish great stuff, and then they will pick it up and carry it if they like it. So I think, yes, I think there's still great potential there, and that market is not underutilized.
Well, that's encouraging. I happen to be a big fan of printed material for a lot of reasons that I won't get into now, but it's encouraging to hear your perspective on that. But let me take you back to some of your operating. So you've operated from Turks and Caicos. You've operated from Chile. I think you do regularly, as a matter of fact. You've had the honor of operating from China. Tell me about those experiences. I mean, that's quite a variety, frankly, from the Caribbean all the way to China. So maybe start with China. How did that get initiated? How did you get that opportunity?
In 2007, I was invited by the People's Republic of China, the government, to come and be part of a delegation from Mayo Clinic to speak about emerging issues in healthcare and healthcare reform. And it was in May. It was going to be over at the same time as the CQ-WPX-CW contest. And I asked the organizer, I said, I'd really like to come. I'm honored. Thank you for the invitation. But I need to get a radio license, and I want to do the contest from China. And so we contacted the China Radio Sport Association, and sure enough, a club had volunteered to host me, the B1Z Club, and BA1RB Fan Ben was going to be the host. He was at Scarborough Reef at that moment, but he was still on email. And so the organizer from the Mayo Clinic side of this conference had grown up in Beijing, and his brother-in-law was very high up in the police department. So I had I had some local support on the ground to take the application to the CRSA, and then it got processed, and I got a license. The B1Z Club decided to do the contest to host me, And I'm forever grateful to their hospitality and to see their club station, which is 70 or 80 kilometers out of Beijing on a mountain where it's incredibly quiet with no noise. And these were really industrious and dedicated operators. We pull up. I had to hire a car and driver to take me from the conference city to this. And the organizers of the conference, the medical conference, provided a translator to come with me. It was a younger medical student. And so each of us who were speaking from abroad had a medical student assigned to us for the entire week, and they were supposed to be available all the time to translate and help. So this young man was interested in what we were doing with the radio, and he came and observed me. And so they gave me the 20-meter station to start the contest so I could work North America. And I learned a lot about why some stations never make it into the B1Z logbook, because there's a whole wall of JA stations that are calling also to work B1Z. And so it's very hard. The signals are at best weak. The strongest U.S. signals were S2 in that year, in 2007, at that station, running like a 5-element monobander on 20 at a reasonably good height, where they had excellent propagation on a mountain that was 1,200 feet above the surrounding area. So it was great, uh, takeoff angles and stuff. And then I realized that, really to work that part of Asia at that point, one had to have a station with full power typically and a high gain antenna, not the brand high gain, but a 4 or 5 element Yagi to do it. And then I understood a lot about local noise. And then what was interesting, I was working a lot of China stations before the contest started. There were so many stations. It was an endless supply of low power HF stations. I realized the hobby was alive and well in the PRC. And so I am not surprised today that we in CQ Worldwide had over a dozen or 2 dozen China stations on that I saw spotted, and I worked a number of them. In fact, I worked one, and it was BA1RB Fan Ben, who said, "Hi, Scott, this is Fan Ben." And I was like, "My friend, it's so nice to hear your voice." And, I had emailed him after WRTC because he competed there. And he said, "Well, we're waiting for you to come back." I guess I'm a lifetime member, honorary member of the Beijing Contest Club. And they actually stopped the contest at the noontime locally and had a lunch for me and had people come in, and we talked a lot. And it was just a wonderful time. What's really interesting, Kevin, is that no matter where you meet ham operators, whatever culture, whatever nationality, they're all the same. And for example, I was in Chile one year, and I'll get into how I got going in Chile in a minute, but I was in Chile one year, and I set up my station at my friend's home in Viña del Mar. And the propagation was beautiful that night. I stayed up till about midnight operating, and then I went to bed and got up the next morning to get on, and the band was dead. And I said, "Oh, well, maybe the bands are closed." But I went out, and his dog had chewed through my coax. And so I had to repair the coax, and I didn't have a soldering iron, and I didn't have a PL259. I had a double barrel. But I said, "Oh, wait a minute." I said, "By the way, there's this guy named Aldo." And I said to my friend, I said, "Would you mind calling him and seeing if he has any of these and if we could go over?" So we called him, and he said, "Absolutely, come on over." So we spent 2 hours at his home. I soldered a couple of PL259s on. He had a brand new Kenwood 990 that he couldn't get to transmit on CW. And I said, "Oh, I'll show you how it works," because it was a lot like the 7800. And you had to push one key, which was a particular key, break-in key to key CW. And he started giving me a bottle of wine as a gift. He said, "Thank you. You've saved my station. I can now operate." And I mean, we're all the same. And, he comes to the U.S. frequently. And, I try to see him if I'm in Chile, and I can. And then I started going to Chile for many, many years just to do medical conferences. And then once I went to the Caribbean and contested with Glenn Johnson, I saw how to take a station overseas in a compact way. So I bought a vertical dipole from Force 12 that fits in a golf club case, a hard shell golf club case. I stuck it in there, put coax, put in connectors, double barrels, put in a screwdriver, and all the stuff. And then I checked it in as luggage on American Airlines, and they didn't charge me for the luggage. It was one of my 2 pieces of luggage. And then I carried the radio in I put it inside a Pelican case in a suitcase. I eventually started doing it that way, and that would be the second piece of checked luggage. Then I would carry my clothing and my computer with me on board. And then I would get them out. And so I started operating from the hotels in Viña del Mar because I just wanted to operate. I had a few hours in the evening between the end of the conference and the dinner time. And so I would work the gray line, starting with Northern Europe and work it all the way across to the west coast of the United States, and just loved it. And then the hotels were all in on letting me do this because they call amateurs radio aficionados in Chile, and they're used often for earthquake communications. So they honor ham operators. They actually relish them. They love them. They respect them. They don't have neighborhood associations fighting someone putting up a dipole or an off-center fed antenna. they actually embrace it. They welcome it. So then a few years after I started, we moved to a different hotel for the meeting, and that hotel did not have roof access. But the hotel said, no problem. And they called two men, and those men climbed up on a ladder to the roof of this hotel. And I sort of, with hands gesturing, showed them how to put the vertical dipole together. And then they dropped the coax down, and I pulled it in the patio of my room. And then I operated there for several years. And in fact, during one CQ Worldwide CW, my oldest daughter came when she was in high school, and she had done a science fair experiment where she was going to computer model propagation in countries that could be worked from Chile, and then compare my contest performance to that. And she went to the state science fair with her project, showing that as a physics kind of project. And eventually we shifted to a third hotel, and they were not so sure about letting me put antennas up, but my friend said, oh, put them up at my home. So if you go to my QRZ page, you will see his weekend home where I'm able to put up a vertical dipole and operate. And I've been there when there was no signals on the air because of the sunspot cycle, when it's been full. And so I really enjoy it. It's a great way for me to have something fun to do in the evening. It lowers the stress level. I look forward to it. I challenge myself with putting it together, and I just really enjoy it. I've made so many new friends in Chile who are radio aficionados, and one year I did CQ Worldwide CW. I started in Rochester at my house, and then when I got to Chile on a Sunday morning, I got from the airport to Viña del Mar, and then I went to the home of CE2SV and did an afternoon 10-meter run there. And so I had two scores. Randy Thompson put my picture in the CQ magazine, saying this is rare, but we've had one station operate from two continents. The scores weren't nothing to write home about, but just that I did it, and I can see someone using Wi-Fi today on a jet traveling the globe during CQ Worldwide, maybe using a flex radio or a remote setup, and just operate on their laptop doing CW, and just using the Wi-Fi. I'm going to try that someday. I don't know when. I'm not talented enough computer-wise to do remote right now. I'm waiting on Elecraft to come up with a simple solution that even a doctor can do, And but I'm going to try it sometime and see if I can do that while I'm flying.
So, Scott, I know you do a lot of international travel, going to conferences. Do you always pack your ham radio gear?
I do not. No, in China you couldn't. You had to. That's why I had to have a local club to host me. It's against the law to bring anything, even a paddle, into the country. So I didn't do that. And my friend Fan Ben told me that when he buys something at Dayton, he has to call the China embassy and let them know what he's buying and bringing in, and then they have to approve it before he can leave to take it home. So I try to be respectful of local customs. I now have an ICOM 7300 I can travel with. I tend to take it a little more than any of the K4s, because if the ICOM 7300 is damaged or stolen or lost, it's a lot cheaper to replace than my main station radio. But at some point, I need to do that. Many times in Jacksonville, I brought my 705 along to do some QRP activity, and I've really enjoyed that. But it's very different to be a QRP station. But yeah, for certain countries, I'm very comfortable doing it, and Chile is certainly one of them. And I leave an antenna in Chile now, and so it's just a matter of taking a radio along. And you got to plan ahead, though. It used to be in Chile you could get a license in about a month, but now it's several months' time. So last year I was not able to get a license in time. I applied too late. This year I got a license. They gave me a license from a Sunday through a Tuesday, which was about 10 days. But I didn't take a radio because I was going to operate from someone else's house when I was there a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, next time I go, my friend who hosts the antenna said, I really miss seeing you operate your radio. You got to bring it. So next year I'm planning to take one. I don't know if it'll be the 7300 or a K4D, but it'll be one of the two that I'll take along and then operate and see what. And then I have a dipole I want to take to his home to see if it works better than the vertical dipole. I think it will. At one point I had a 2-element stepper. I still own it, but I don't have it up. That I plan to take to Chile, but it's a little too big to check as luggage on the airline. So I need to figure out a way to take that and operate. My dream has always been to take 3 hams from Minnesota, go down and do a contest from his home on the ocean. I mean, we can set the antennas up, and then it's a 110-foot drop down to the ocean, and just aim north, west to the U.S., northeast to Europe, and or northwest even Asia, and it would just be an ideal place with absolutely no noise.
I've taken a couple trips, both to St. Vincent with my gear, and I've got to say it was a lot of fun trying to figure out what to take, how to pack it. problem solving once I was there. Both times I had issues that had to be dealt with. So even before I was on the air, it was a certain amount of fun and challenge just getting on the air. The first trip down to St. Vincent was not successful. I've talked about it on this show before. But it was a great learning experience, and I made up for it the next time around. I had all those things taken care of, but I've got an upcoming trip to the British Virgin Islands, which I'll take my Elecraft, and another trip in January to the Bahamas. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. But it is a little bit nerve-wracking to make sure you have gear that works and you have the right redundancy so that if something breaks, you can still be on the air. I made a very simple trip down to Virginia to see my dad here recently and packed my gear. He's the person that got me into ham radio. He was W1YOA. So I thought this would be kind of cool. We'll do a POTA activation, and my antenna, I couldn't get it to work. And I went through all that trouble and didn't have the redundancy because I assumed, since this is just a short trip, what could possibly go wrong? Well, I packed it up and brought it home. But let's talk about CQ Hall of Fame. That is an incredible honor. It's a relatively short list of names on that list. Tell me about that experience, about being inducted into the CQ Hall of Fame.
In the year of the pandemic, I was involved in helping lead the world's largest study with COVID. It was called the U.S. Convalescent Plasma Study. Most medical studies enroll 500 to 1,500 patients. A few cardiology studies, 15 or 20,000. We were able to enroll 105,000 people in the United States and at every territory from every county in this country. We were asked and tasked by the Food and Drug Administration, meaning Mayo Clinic, to lead the study. And so my friend and colleague, Dr. Michael Joyner, was the principal investigator, but he had never run a clinical trial. I had done so. So he asked me if I would help him. And I said, of course I will. And we recruited a data scientist and also a PhD expert who could create some of the others, bring some other strengths we didn't have. And so we had a team of 4 people who led the study. And we basically discovered that if you were given convalescent plasma that had a high amount of neutralizing antibodies to COVID, it would actually reduce your risk of death by about 6%. We published it in the New England Journal of Medicine in January of 2021. In May or June of that year, much to my surprise, there was an editorial in CQ where he was talking about COVID heroes, and I was called out by Rich Mossison. I never really chatted with Rich and wasn't even aware that he was noticing what we were doing. We had been on Ham Nation to try to encourage people to donate. I made a lot of media appearances. Some people put my name with my call sign when they saw the RRL handbook on the bookshelf behind me when I was doing the media appearances using Zoom or a local computer in my house. And so several of my friends in Texas and across the United States put together an application, much to my surprise, and nominated me for the Hall of Fame. And I didn't even realize I was going to be in the Hall of Fame. In fact, there was one of the ham periodical editors had contacted me on Saturday night of date and said, "Congratulations, something's coming out tomorrow that you'll be really excited about." And I said, "Seriously?" He said, "You don't have any idea?" I said, "I have no idea." It turns out that I had actually nominated the FDA physician, Peter Marks, who is also a ham. I think his call is AB3CX, for the CQ Hall of Fame, and pointed out that he was the brilliance behind Operation Warp Speed that led to the vaccination strategies, the monoclonals, the convalescent plasma, and other things. He was sort of the driving force at FDA to do that. And I thought, his leadership alone had saved a couple 100,000. I did an back of the envelope calculation. Sort of between several 100,000 and 1 million lives were probably saved just by what Peter had done in terms of leading that effort. He didn't do it alone, and people say that, but he certainly led it, and it takes a good leader. And so I had nominated Peter for that honor, and I didn't realize that several of my friends had nominated me. So we were both inducted the same day, and quite surprised to learn about it. And so that, I was inducted for my work with COVID. I'm greatly honored to be honored by CQ. It's humbling. I don't feel worthy, but I am just still shocked to this day. And it makes me realize that I have to be an even better ambassador for ham radio, because people look up just because I have the title. And, I'm grateful that I was honored, but it's also a big responsibility that I try to fulfill every day. And when I think about what the world went through with COVID and what we went through to bring therapies out, it was really a 3-year period or so that I wish we had never had to go through. In hindsight, if we could have waved a magic wand and stopped it, it would have been wonderful. But I feel very fortunate and really honored that I had the opportunity to do something productive and helpful for the nation and for the world during that time, and that it was great because it kept me occupied and busy. And that's what made life so busy when I was NCJ editor, that Ward Silver stepped in and helped. So, thanks to Ward Silver, thanks to others who helped take some of my responsibilities off the plate, that allowed me to focus more on doing that work and just providing a service to the nation. And I just was happy to be of help and be of service. Not everyone gets to be at a place at a time when you can do that, but when you are, it's really a neat honor to be able to contribute and do that. And so, I'm still getting on thinking about it, and it's just really neat that I was at a place at a time in my career that I could help make a contribution and give back to this nation, because it's given me so much as a citizen, frankly, as a young man growing up, as a ham radio operator, with public education through medical school, and now training and work at Mayo Clinic. It's grateful that I could do something in return to give back to help make the profession and the world a better place. So that's the story of that.
Well, thank you for that significant contribution. It's such a great reflection on our hobby to have people like yourself making those sorts of contributions to the world. And your ham radio operator, I just think it bodes well for us as a hobby, which leads me to the future of ham radio. There's been a lot of conversation about how, particularly in the U.S., the ranks aren't growing. That ham radio operators are getting older; they're passing away. What do you think the future is for ham radio, and how do we encourage more people to get involved with the hobby?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I thought a lot about this when I was editor of NCJ and worked with Dr. Frank Howell, K4FMH, to do some data analysis. Frank is a world-class statistician and data analyst, and he came up with some fantastic data that really showed just what you're describing. But what we also showed, uh, and I was privileged to be able to accept his papers for publication, so I say we, it's really Frank's work, uh, that there are groups replenishing the ranks, right? You can see with some of the sideband and digital contests that there is a lot of interest growing. So, what I would say, number one, is ham radio is going to remain a viable hobby and a revival interest for people. Number two, like everything in life, it's going to look differently in 20 years than it did 20 years ago. If we think just about radio technology and antennas today, uh, we now can do things with FT8 and Yagis and stacks and really tremendous receivers and SDRs that we couldn't do 30 years ago. So we're grateful for that progress, and I think we should expect to continue to see progress. So I think the hobby will look a little different than it does now. I think we will continue to see growth in areas that we haven't thought about. The old paradigm, like the paradigm that I became a ham at age 12, is a paradigm that's just not going to exist, because today's young people live much more stressful. And when I say chaotic, I mean they have more opportunities and things thrown at them, growing at them, coming at them, and they're not bored. Their problem is not boredom, like my problem was as a bright 12-year-old in a seventh grade class who had to go to the library to find books because the substitute teacher didn't want to teach. He wanted to just have us occupy ourselves. And I got lucky and discovered ham radio. And I had parents who encouraged me. I give my parents credit, especially my mom. And she said to me early on, she said, "You like this hobby? It's not the cheapest hobby. You need to find a good career that will allow you to enjoy it and have things." And I didn't become a doctor to make money, but I'm grateful that being a physician, in a field that's well compensated, I can invest some in the hobby. But I think we're going to see, instead of youth coming into the hobby as the primary source, we're going to see several several sources of new hams. Not youth will come, but also I think we should look at young adults. We should also look at middle and older aged adults. So, for example, many adults in their middle age who've wanted to be hams now have children who have reached the stage where they don't require one-on-one parenting constantly, like a toddler or a preschooler. And the kids sometimes don't want to spend time with mom and dad. They want to talk with their friends and do their homework. And so now mom or dad has time to think about things they wanted to do, and they're bright and they're inquisitive, and ham radio is still very much for them. or they are into the prepper community, or they're into hiking and exercise, and they see people doing soda or POTA things on the air. And so, hey, I'd like to combine a little bit of communication with that, especially with the digital modes. And then I think there are a number of hobbyists who will enter in who at retirement say, I got the time and the money, and I've always wanted to do this, and life's not getting any shorter, or any longer, rather. Life's shorter. I want to do it, and I'm going to do it now. And I think we need to have materials, we need to have training classes, we need to have mentoring at all of those stages to help them do that. And I was in Chile. One of my colleagues from work brought her 9-year-old son along, 8 or 9-year-old son. So I started teaching him Morse code. And he picked up about 12 letters just in the 3 days he and I practiced a little bit. And I brought up my iPhone, and there's one of the apps on it. You could like touch a straight key, and I taught him how to send DAWs and DITs, and then I would send him letters. He picked them up, and then I could spell the word his, the word hi, I don't know, he and she, and he could pick it all up. And then I taught him, EISH, and then TMO, and then he learned Tom, and he learned mom, and we were working on letters, and he picked it right up. And I encouraged his parents to bring him over to see my station, and I'll be happy to help him get a license if he wants and to learn it, because this young man was asking all of us about airplanes. He wants to design airplanes when he's grown, like his dad, who's an aeronautical engineer. But he could be a ham radio operator because he's got the knack, and the skill and the interest. But I think a lot of people do. So let's target efforts across a spectrum of ages. And let's also say that not everybody's going to be like a Tim Duffy or a Craig Thompson and have a really big station with lots of towers. Many people will have end wires. Some people will have a tower. Some people, like me, will have 2 towers. But most people will have a simpler station, or they'll really love to go on vacation like you did and do a POTA event with Dad, or do something else and just get on the air with a wire antenna, either an end-fed half wave or just a simple dipole. And let's have activities and achievement awards that will help different personality types want to do that. So, for example, POTA and SOTA are great. They have awards, and they also just have the sheer joy of watching people operate. I love watching Thomas Witherspoon on YouTube. Not that Thomas teaches me operating techniques. No, I like it because he loves every POTA event he does. He's sending it 20 words a minute or 25, and he's talking, and he just has a lot of fun. And I've enjoyed your podcast because I've watched you grow as a contester, and you're asking the very questions I did 15 years ago or so about contesting, and it's nice to see that excitement. And so let's have ways to help everybody get into the hobby. Where do I think we're going? I think we're going in this direction. I think that the big radios of the past are going to be the big radios of the past. We're going to see smaller and smaller events, a lot more remote operations. A lot of people will either build a remote station on a half an acre with a few dipoles, or have a tower or 2 and then connect to it. I think, I look forward to the day that I can operate from my iPad or cell phone. My friends say, if you buy a Flex, you can do it now. I understand. Okay, but I like Elecraft because if you love CW and you hear the K4D and CW, you'll have nothing else. It is the sweetest radio, right? So I can't wait until I can remote from here in the hotel to my station at home and do a CWT. And I can't wait until we can remote in and there's a DX station on, and I don't have to quickly run home at lunch and hope to work them in 20 minutes and get back to the office, right? So I think more portable operation. I just think, we're in the best time ever of ham radio. The best days are still ahead of us in terms of technology and in terms of activities and operating. And, I was slow and late to FT8, but boy, do I love FT8. I can work DX stations I've never worked before. It's fun. It's not, my friends who don't do it think, it's just automatic. No, it's not automatic. There's no guarantee you'll be called, but if you ever have done RTTY, FT8 is so much better for DXing than RTTY because, the multiple coding sequences prevent mistakes and errors. And man, I just love it. I love to see people who have simple wire antennas get DXCC because of FT8. We should celebrate that. Let's not look down our noses, those of us who made, DXCC with Morse code or sideband. Let's embrace people who do it, and let's figure out a way to get every country in the world opened up to ham radio again. That would be great. And I also think we don't talk enough about the positives. For example, ham radio has a fellowship that's global. Right? We don't discuss politics. We don't fight over politics or religion. We actually come together over technology and the joy of human-human interaction. And there are very few things that do that. Medicine allows that too. That's why I like being a doctor. I go to global conferences. I meet people from Iran and other places that I would never be able to go into those countries and see, But we can talk about important things. We can learn from them. They can learn from us. There's bi-directional learning all the time. Same with ham radio. I mean, the epicenter of contesting is not America, it's Europe. And that's why we need a single global journal for contesting so we can learn from what the Europeans are doing. And man, are they getting the young people, the young adults like Philip Springer, who's I think a DK station. I can't remember his call, but he's very active and was at WRTC a couple of cycles ago. So I think the best days are still ahead of us, and let's realize that it's going to look different. It's going to be different, but that's okay. And the radios have never been better. The antennas have never been better. The access to antennas, if you can't build your own, you can go in with a group and do a remote operation. That didn't exist 20 years ago or 10 years ago very easily. Doing what you did from a hotel room, wasn't that great? You could not have to miss the contest. You could be on vacation. You could do a few hours of the contest. You were happy. Your wife was happy. Your friends were happy.
Somewhat happy.
It was a win-win-win. Somewhat happy, of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah. So that's where I think the hobby's going, and I think we will find appropriate venues to educate and to help share that knowledge. And I didn't mention websites earlier, but I love websites. I mean, I use contestcalendar.com all the time. I'm always scouring the web for antenna building techniques, understanding the ionosphere better, understanding my radios better, thinking about radios, looking at Rob Sherwood's website, nc0b.com. So yes, no, I think the internet is really an integral part of ham radio, and I didn't mention websites, but I think that there is a huge potential there to just have all kinds of websites. I still wish somebody would do a contesting only podcast, interview great contesters for 15 minutes every week and just have one or two lessons that you're learning.
I'm working toward that, Scott. I've been encouraging people to do a quick conversation with me post contest. Something like the summaries you see on 3830 scores. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm working on it.
Thank you. I can't wait. Let me know when you get it out so I can subscribe. Like, subscribe, and talk about it. And there are a lot of people I talk to on email frequently, both in the United States and outside the United States, and I'm learning a lot from them and how we do things. So,
Scott, I got to tell you, I really appreciate your enthusiasm. I mean, if I close my eyes for a second, I can envision the teenager in Kentucky. You're still that young man, still enthusiastic about the hobby, still turning the dials. And honestly, I think that it's going to be people like you and your conversations with people that encourage more people to get involved with ham radio. You're professional, you tell a good story, and you're enthusiastic. And I really appreciate you taking time today. I know it's been a long day for you. Not even sure what time it is now. I'm sure I've kept you longer than I had intended, but thank you so much for spending some time with me tonight.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for all you do for the hobby and all the information you bring. And I really enjoy talking about ham radio. If my wife has one complaint, she's like, "You need an evening off. Why are you speaking into this club or that club on Zoom?" And the answer is, it charges me. It gives me excitement. It's ham radio is an important part of my life. It's not the most important part, but it's an important part, and it keeps me sane. It keeps me recharged. And if I ever have insomnia, all I have to do is put on a CQ, either go work CQ or listen to Morse code, and it's soothing and it puts me right to sleep. In fact, I'll tell you one little secret about me that I rarely tell people, but I'll share it just between us since it's late to the podcast. Many nights I'll go down on 20 meters and start working. Have the beam 10 to 30 degrees. So I'll work both Asian and European, Russia and other Asian stations, Azerbaijan and others. And boy, if it's been a long and tiring day, I occasionally fall asleep working CW. And I realize that I don't have to have a glass of wine or do anything to fall asleep or take medicine. I just have to get on ham radio for a few minutes. It relaxes me. And then the next day I have a great story to tell people about who I talked to or who I worked. So you're right. I like this hobby more than I did as a teenager, preteen, but it's still there. And, those gentlemen in Kentucky, in southeastern Kentucky, who helped me get started, to them, I'll give a big tip of the hat and a big thank you, So, hey, it's been a joy to join you and a pleasure, and I'll say 73.